Hi, my name's Kason Smith, and in order to cut down on the fear of being involved with a Socratic technique, both as a student and instructor, I'd like to present a positive simulation of the phenomenon. Hopefully I can convince you the technique is not only useful, but in many ways, fun. Hello, great to see you again. This morning we're going over what we learned about the legal ID in broadcasting. So, what is a legal ID?
A thing we do when the big hand hits 12.
Now, at this point, I can acknowledge the answer encouragingly by saying, "That's right!" But as an instructor, I'm not too impressed by that answer. These students were taught the basic content they needed to know for this Socratic technique to be its most effective. Also, many of the students noticed that answer didn't answer much of anything. To prevent similar flippant answers, I'll build the discussion on more solid ground. Well, what do the rules and regulations of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, say a legal ID must have? The call letters and city of license. Now we're off and running. Why do we air a legal ID? Because it's an FCC regulation.
A station can be fined by the FCC or maybe lose its broadcast license if they don't air it.
And what would happen if you screwed up the legal ID? I'd be back working at Starbucks. All true, all true. What does the FCC do? What is their major function?
They regulate all broadcasting in the United States.
What do you think their reasoning is behind making the airing of legal IDs a broadcast regulation?
Because the government loves doing things like that.
That's a whole different conversation, but I'll go along with you just a little bit. Why would the FCC think it's important they issue unique legal IDs to every station so they can be identified? Now, just so you know, I'm reinforcing some of their previous content learning with that question. We had a lesson which explained every broadcast legal ID in this country is unduplicated. Each broadcast outlet, therefore, has a legal ID exclusive to that station.
Like I said, so they can be in control.
Of course, but is it beneficial for anyone else to know exactly which station they're listening to?
Oh, so people know which station to complain about when they hear a dirty word.
Yeah, most people will complain about something they heard or saw. I don't have any stories of people writing the FCC saying how well a station is programmed. So what do we mean by call letters?
Letters of the alphabet, which the station airs. They announce or call out the letters on air so they can be identified.
Can you give me some examples?
KABC, KCSN, KCAA.
All right, this one's on top of their game. Let's try to get others involved. Can anyone else tell me if call letters always start with the letter K? Notice that's a closed-end question. This is to coax some of the more timid students out from the bushes. They have a 50-50 chance of getting the answer right. Yes? No? Maybe so?
There are stations which start with the letter W.
Is there any reason for that?
Roughly speaking, stations east of the Mississippi start with W. Stations west of the Mississippi start with K. Seems kind of backwards. If a station is west of the Mississippi, shouldn't its call letters start with W for west?
That certainly would make sense. But remember, we're dealing with the government here. You're correct. Roughly speaking, the Mississippi divides the K's from the W's. But the first commercially licensed radio station in this country was KDKA in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, pointing out an early exception to the naming convention. This is actually new knowledge, not included in a previous content lesson. They've also learned the reasoning behind using K or W is not entirely obvious. I notice all the examples of call letters given so far use 4 letters. Do all legal IDs use 4 letters?
When I lived in New York, my folks listened to WOR. That only has 3 letters.
On vacation in Atlanta, I remember WSB.
Notice the shy ones spoke up here. They feel safe in relating a personal experience which I can't logically refute. Both very good examples. Early stations were often issued call letters which had only 3 letters.
But wait a minute, WSB wasn't just an AM radio station. It was also a television station, and I think an FM radio station, too.
Excellent observation. Did all three of those stations have the same exact call letters, WSB?
Yes.
Let's look a little closer at that. You said WSB was an AM station, a television station, and an FM station. What would be the easiest way to differentiate the call letters for those three stations that do different types of broadcasting? The simplest and most obvious way to incorporate what type of broadcasting those stations did. How would you incorporate that into the call letters?
Oh, I think I know. Call the FM station WSB FM. Call the TV station WSB TV.
And what would you call the AM station?
WSBAM.
Yep, that's very probable. But let me ask you this question. It's one you should know the answer to. What type of broadcasting came first, radio or TV? Please, please tell me you know this. Please, please get it right. This lets the students know that we're in it together, even if it is a scary Socratic technique.
Radio?
Yeah, they had radio before TV. Which type of modulation of radio came first? Frequency modulation or amplitude modulation? Again, supporting content learning here by using the proper terms for FM and AM. Frequency and amplitude modulation.
AM.
So if I hear you correctly, AM radio broadcasting was invented first, then FM radio, and finally television, right?
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm down with that.
That's obvious. That's logical.
And of course, today we have digital broadcasting for both radio and television, often referred to as HD and DTV, respectively. So when scientists at colleges started puttering around with modulated broadcasts, they weren't thinking about future forms of modulation. They just thought about the technology as radio. So when it came to giving out legal IDs, the feds didn't think much about including AM in the call letters to differentiate it from modulation systems which, frankly, had not been invented yet. Later, when different types of broadcasting were invented and owned by the same company, they wanted to use similar call letters, so they just had FM or TV tagged onto the end of the call letters. So for our WSB example, don't be surprised if the call letters are WSB TV, WSB FM, and simply WSB for the AM station. Now for our next class, please let me know if you can find any stations in the U.S. where that naming convention is flipped for an AM and FM station. I mean, for example, a frequency modulated station with, let's say, the call letters KSTR, and an amplitude modulated station with the call letters of KSTR AM. Can you find two stations like that? Is that even possible? I'll just call that a Socratic homework assignment. So I have one more question about the first letter in call letters. There's a radio station in Montreal with the call letters CKUT and one in Mexico City with the call letters XHUPC-FM. What was the FCC thinking about with these call letters?
The C was probably to denote it's from Canada, and the X would be for the X in Mexico?
That would be a reasonable guess.
Or the FCC might have been thinking how great it is to not have to come up with call letters for stations in Canada and Mexico, since they only regulate broadcasting in the United States.
That would be a much, much better guess. Hey, always be thinking. So how do we determine the city of license? Is it where the studios are, what city its corporate offices are in, where the transmitter's located? Now here's where some might say I'm being mean. And you'll see what I'm talking about in the second part of this video presentation.